So fellas, a lot has gone on in combat sports this week, from the build-up to the UFC 302 to some information that has recently been announced about UFC 302, which we're going to go over, to the fight announcements and just everything that has really significantly gone on in the world of combat sports this week. I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion, and I might do this every Friday just before a card, just talk about what has gone on in the world of MMA and recap the previous card, but we'll go straight in there with the announcements. Yeah, we've had a lot of announcements this week from now to the last week, and we'll go in there with the one that has kind of caught the MMA fans' attention off guard, with Luque versus Diaz and Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa. Well, first of all, I'm not going to say I'm completely against a return of Nick Diaz, even though he looked like he had no business being in there in the octagon against Robbie Lawler. I wouldn't have minded Nick Diaz to return if it was against Tony Ferguson. That was the obvious route to go down. You've got two old, washed veterans, and both of them are in desperate needs of a win, so it would have made more sense to match them against each other. They're closer to each other's skill level, and it's probably the only winnable fight for Tony Ferguson. But instead, they've given Nick Diaz against Vicente Luque. I don't know why they've done that. Vicente Luque is going to absolutely scramble Nick Diaz like an egg. I understand Luque might have not looked his best in his past few fights. He might have looked really off, and he's past his prime and whatever, but you got to remember, Luque's only really lost to the top-ranked guys. Buckley, who's just managed to get a win over Ruziboyev. Jeff Neal. Bilal Muhammad, who's literally going to be fighting for a belt next. Luque has still been able to beat and finish a lot of the top guys and top contenders in the welterweight division. And he is going to absolutely scramble Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz, he returned a few years ago, obviously against Robbie Lawler, and he looked horrible, man. He looked horrible. He looked like he was operating on like 15%. I don't know what the UFC have thought by bringing him against Vicente Luque, and that was 3 years ago, that fight with Robbie Lawler. I can only imagine how he's going to look nowadays. And then obviously Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chiesa. You know what? I'm not actually completely against that matchup. I actually think Michael Chiesa stylistically is not an easy fight. There's no such thing as an easy fight for Tony Ferguson in 2024, but a winnable fight for Tony Ferguson. Chiesa, he hasn't got really much of a striking threat. He's got good grappling. He could latch up a submission, but Tony Ferguson's also got some, just weird and crafty ground game. And I know Tony Ferguson's on like, a 7-fight losing streak now, but I actually think Tony Ferguson could have a chance in this fight. I'm not just trying to be delusional. If I had to bet money, I would bet money on Michael Chiesa, but out of every opponent in the UFC, he's not getting fed to like an up-and-coming prospect. He's getting fed to another old-washed kind of fighter in Michael Chiesa. But I would have preferred Ferguson versus Diaz, but I think the reason they did it is because they wanted two valuable matchups rather than just one, which I guess is smart business-wise from the UFC. But yeah, we've got Diaz versus Ferguson on that fight night. Also on that fight night of Abu Dhabi, Davison Figueiredo versus Marlon Vera. I believe this is the co-main event of the card. This is a really good fight. Yeah, this is a really good fight. It's a test for both of them because obviously Davison Figueiredo, he joined the bantamweight division, had that really good win over Rob Font, and then had that win over Cody Garbrandt where most people thought he was going to win anyway, which he did. And now he's facing the guy who's just challenged for the belt, Marlon Vera. Now, Marlon Vera is a bit of a weird fighter to gauge because he's got wins over a lot of these guys, obviously. I still feel like he does well against these shorter strikers. You know, he KO'd Dominic Cruz, KO'd Frankie Edgar, but these are all old guys. He was able to last on the feet against Pedro Munoz as well. But you look at him on the feet with guys like Sandhagen and O'Malley, and he just can't, he can't handle. Like, he can't stay on the feet with him. The dude is getting outstruck. And then obviously his grappling's really poor as well. And he's against a guy who's got great grappling in Davison Figueiredo. So stylistically, it's a really fun fight. If Figueiredo can beat Marlon Vera, we might have a new title challenger in the bantamweight division, which is crazy because it was like a year ago when this dude was fighting in the flyweight division. And if Marlon Vera can beat Figueiredo, that's going to push him straight back into the top 5 area where he can get matched up against those guys. So I'm a really big fan of that matchup, and I think it's going to be super competitive. We also got the announcement that, well, this is a bit of an old news now, but Ian Gary and Michael Venom Page, yeah, this is kind of old news. I'm not a massive hater of the matchup. In fact, I'm glad that they've got a fight on UFC 303 because that card was looking a little bit, I'm not going to say it was a bad card. A lot of people have said it's bad. I don't think it was a bad card, but it could have been improved. So I'm glad that they've got Ian Gary on there, and they've got him against MVP. I'm a little bit worried that it could be one of those fights where they're both, you've got two counter punches, they're both waiting for each other to come in, and it ends up being quite a boring fight. But you've got two guys decently fun on paper, and if this makes for a good fight, this could honestly be a really, really fun striking matchup. So I'm not against Michael Venom Page versus Ian Gary. And obviously, we also got the announcement, this is even older, Jamal Hill versus Carlos Ulberg. Fan of this matchup. I'm glad that Ulberg's been brought in. I wasn't a massive hater of the Khalil Roundtree fight, but I feel like this is a big step up for Ulberg, and this could potentially be what the light heavyweight division needs. Ulberg's in an absolute streak. If he can get past Jamal Hill, that's going to be crazy how he has gone from being unranked and 2 fights later, probably going to be fighting for a belt on his next fight if he beats Hill. But he's against Hill, who obviously just been KO'd at UFC 300. That's going to be a really fun, striking matchup. Also on UFC 303. And we also got the announcement that Usyk is going to be taking on Fury in a rematch. Now, we all knew this rematch was coming. It was a 2-fight deal, but it's officially got a date of December 21st. So Christmas 2024, Fury versus Usyk. The rematch is going on. My expectations for this fight, I think it's going to be another super competitive fight. I think Usyk's got it though. Like, people are going to say, oh, Fury needs to lock in. Dude, he locked in for this fight. You saw the shape that Fury was in. I feel like if Fury can't beat him the first time, and this might seem like deluded logic, I don't know why you would necessarily pick Fury to win again. Not that he can't win again. I just don't know why that would be your initial thoughts. And back to McGregor. Yeah, we also got an announcement that Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler are going to be having a press conference in Dublin. Fair play for Michael Chandler fair play to Michael Chandler for doing this, because he is going to get absolutely flamed in that press conference, both by the fans and Conor McGregor. He is going to get destroyed. If you know anything about Conor McGregor in Ireland, look at the Jose Aldo press conference. Any press conference where Conor McGregor is in Ireland, it is going to be carnage, and I would not want to be the guy who's who's going to be fighting Conor McGregor. One thing I'm intrigued about, though, with this press conference is obviously we got the announcement of Ian Gary and MVP, and I wonder how harsh the crowd are going to be on MVP, because Ian Gary, he is the most hated fighter in the UFC right now, but he comes from Ireland, so you'd think that they're going to rep him. And MVP seems to be a bit of a fan favourite. So I'm thinking, do you think the Irish crowd are going to be as harsh on MVP? I don't think they are, even though they're going to be backing Ian Gary. It's as a country guy. I don't know if they're going to be as harsh on MVP, but yeah, that's a big announcement. I can't wait for that press conference. It's only like a week as well, if that. It's not even that far away, so I can't wait to see that press conference between Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Chandler's going to get flamed. Now, swiftly moving from the announcements, we go to a guy who was fought not too long ago, and I have touched on this in a few videos, but Buckley. Yeah, Buckley has been on Twitter, and he's essentially poured his, love from the fans and him being a fan favourite. He's just poured that down the drain with every tweet that this guy does. He's kind of turned into one of the UFC Twitter champions, and he's been super active on Twitter, calling out everyone. The dude compared himself to GSP. He's been having a back and forth with Kevin Holland, who has literally shut this guy's lights out before. He's been beefing with Cub Swanson. He's even had a little bit of an exchange with Shavkat. Shavkat's had to pull out the Google Translate with this guy. So he's kind of been on Twitter everywhere. I understand what Buckley's trying to do. He's trying to be the heel. He's trying to be the villain of the welterweight division that goes against the fans. But I feel like his persona and his personality, it would have done much better as a fan favourite. The dude had gone out there in the co-main event of UFC St. Louis in front of his crowd and beaten Ruziboyev. From there, he could have called out Burns and got a big fight. Whereas it's just, I don't even know, like the McGregor call out as well. I haven't even brought that up. The horrible call out of McGregor. I really don't know what Buckley wants next or what he's looking to do with his career. At 1 minute, he's calling out McGregor trying to be a fan favourite, and then next minute he's trying to, kind of pour his fan base down the drain. So I don't know what Buckley's doing, but he's just been crazy on Twitter recently, and I don't know what's going on with that guy. Now we move back over to boxing. Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. Some people don't mind the matchup. Some people absolutely despise the matchup because it's a 50-year-old man against there with Jake Paul. Now, we also got the news that Mike Tyson had health issues boarding the plane. Now, I don't know the exact health issues that Mike Tyson has, but it's not what you want to hear when you've got a 50-year-old man against an up-and-coming, well, I'm not going to call him up-and-coming, but, one of the better influencer boxers, I guess you could call him, a lower-level professional. That ain't good news anyway. So to have additional health problems that are being tied to Mike Tyson's name, that's only going to make this fight even dodgier. So Jake Paul versus Tyson, it's looking worse and worse every single week with the announcements of Mike Tyson's health issues. That ain't looking good for Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. And then talking of old veterans, Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's recently come out and said that she doesn't go to UFC events because she feels like she's going to be booed and basically just vilified at UFC events. And I can't help but think that she did this to herself. The reason you're booed and you're vilified at UFC events and you're not, the UFC fans and MMA fans don't really like it is because you don't take responsibility or accountability. You lost to Holly Holm and you lost to Amanda Nunes. You didn't take it on the chest. You made a bunch of excuses. You tried bringing them down, and that's just not what you want to see as a fan. The last thing you want to see as a fan is excuses, and that's exactly what Ronda Rousey has been doing her entire career ever since those losses. But the fact that she's not really been able to take accountability and responsibility for those losses and just just overall the personality that she has. She's done it to herself. Like, why would MMA fans randomly hate you? You were essentially the pioneer for women's MMA, and I know there's going to be people out there, oh, women MMA sucks or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like, she is once was one of the biggest stars in the sport. She is the biggest MMA female star that the UFC has seen, and now the reason the fans hate her isn't because of the losses, it's because of the way she handled those losses. So I feel like you can't really go on a podcast and blame the UFC fans when you did that to yourself. So I never understood that. And then talking of washed UFC fighters, Paige Van Sant, another female washed UFC fighter, recently had a boxing match against Elle Brooke in Misfits Boxing. And I'm not a fan of these MMA fighters, retired MMA fighters going and boxing influencers, because it seems like the influencers have the number of these MMA fighters. So she fought Elle Brooke, got dropped in the first round, and I believe Elle Brooke's only been boxing for like 3 years. She got dropped in the first round, and she couldn't even win the fight. It took her to a draw. So that's just not what you want to be seeing for Paige Van Sant. I know she was never the top level, type of caliber fighter in the UFC, but still, to go from being in the UFC to not even being able to win boxing matches over influencers, that's got to be a hit, man. That's similar to like Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. So that's just not good for Paige Van Sant, and that kind of just shows the state of her career. And talking about ex-UFC fighters going over to boxing, Greg Hardy. Yeah, this guy. He's been knocked out again this week. He was KO'd again. I don't know why this guy continues to pick up the gloves. He had a somewhat decent run in the UFC where he's able to pick up wins. He even had fights with ranked guys like Taito Ivaza and Sergey Spivak. But yeah, his career has kind of just gone down every single fight. He's fought in boxing promotions, and it just seems like every month we get a new announcement. Greg Hardy's been KO'd by this guy. It's on these like small promotions as well. I don't even think it's been official on his professional record. So it's on these random ass promotions, and he's still getting KO'd. I don't know why he's doing it. He can't be getting paid a lot of money for it. And he's just kind of flushed his career down the drain. This dude was in the NFL and the UFC, and now he's just getting KO'd by random ass people in these random boxing events. So Greg Hardy's career seems like it's taken a massive hit, and this guy needs to retire ASAP. Surely he's got enough money from the NFL and the UFC, even though, UFC ain't known for paying a lot of money. And then UFC 302 this week, and recently there's been a bit of a rumor, not really a rumor, but a speculation going around of Islam Makhachev and staph infection. Now, obviously there seems to be some sort of curse with Dustin Poirier and staph infection. His last opponent, Benoit Saint-Denis, had staph infection, which led to him getting KO'd, and maybe this is what is needed for Islam Makhachev to make the fight between him and Poirier actually fair. So Islam Makhachev, it's not been official that he has staph infection, but a lot of fans have noticed a bit of a lump on his leg and his calf, and people have tied it to staph infection, and a lot of people seem to think it is staph infection, which, if that's true, that's going to be hugely advantageous for Dustin Poirier. I mean, like I said, we saw his last opponent in Benoit Saint-Denis ended up getting KO'd. I'm not just saying it was because of the staph infection, but that definitely had something to do with it. So this could be a problem for Islam Makhachev, man, and if that is staph infection, that ain't what you want to be seeing. And maybe the reason Islam Makhachev hasn't spoke up on it is because obviously if he admitted to it, there could be problems with the fight staying on. So hopefully the fight still goes through, which I'm 99% sure it will, but if he does have staph infection, that could change the fight completely. And talking to Dustin Poirier, his custom shorts came out. I'm a big fan of these custom shorts. I don't mind fighters having custom shorts as long as they're like the main event, or at least higher up on the card. I don't just want random ass fighters to be getting custom shorts, but I really like the shorts. It's quite similar to like a Max Holloway short at UFC 300. I'm a fan of them. I liked Holloway's, I liked Pereira's, I like Dustin Poirier's, and I'm not a massive hater of these floral shorts, especially for the fact that it's probably going to be his last fight in the UFC. It's his biggest fight that he's going to have for the rest of his career. Let him have his floral shorts, and I'm a big fan. Imagine Poirier KO's Islam Makhachev in those shorts. That's going to be crazy. And talking of attire, the Golden Gloves we recently got to see what the Golden Gloves are going to look like on the fighters. We saw it on Islam Makhachev. We've seen it on Dustin Poirier. The Golden Gloves has been leaked, and I'm not a fan, man. It's like this weird mustard yellow colour. It doesn't really look like a nice type of yellow or a nice type of gold. I'm just really not a big fan of them. And I feel like if they had a bit more black on the gloves, it would have looked better. But I don't really like the look of the gloves, and a lot of MMA fans don't. I'm not trying to be overly negative and complain about everything, but sometimes you really think that it doesn't need to be fixed if it ain't broken. You know what I mean? We don't need to have these different coloured gloves for the reason of what, even if they are going to do these coloured gloves, I feel like it would only make sense for the champion to have the gloves. The champion's got the gold around the name. The champion wears the golden gloves rather than just the challenger having the golden gloves as well. I never really thought that made sense, but well, they're here now. I think we're going to get used to them. I don't hate them, but I just feel like it's a bit of a downgrade from the normal gloves. So it is what it is. Talking to UFC 302 as well. Recently, well, I say recently, literally in the last hour, this got announced, and by the time this gets uploaded, maybe it's been cleared up, but as of right now, Jailton Almeida and Alexander Romanov has been moved off the main card of UFC 302. Nobody knows why or what the UFC are trying to do, but instead they've brought Nico Price versus Alex Morono up to the main card. I don't know why they've done this, because a lot of people are saying, oh, the UFC are just, they hate Jailton Almeida after his performance with Derek Lewis. Well, if that was the case, they wouldn't have put him so high in the prelims against Curtis Blades. And I'm pretty sure they've forgiven him by now, right? And I think everyone would much rather have Almeida versus Romanov than Nico Price. And that's such a random matchup as well. Nico Price versus Alex Morono. You'd have thought that if they're going to bring a fight from the prelims up to the main card, they would have done Cesar Almeida versus Roman Kopylov, and then the prelim headliner of Jailton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov. But they've just switched the matchup. They've put Jailton Almeida and Romanov on the prelims, and Nico Price versus Morono of all fights. Why would that be the fight that they brought up? Either it's some sort of technological error that we don't know about, or there's something behind it why they've done it, but I don't understand why they've done that. I didn't even mind the fight between Almeida and Romanov, and I thought that was one of the few fun fights that we could have actually seen from Jailton Almeida, like a first round TKO, but for some reason, yeah, that's been switched. I don't know why they've done it. Maybe by the time this video's come out, it's been cleared up, but yeah, that's random, and I don't know why they've done it. I can't really say I'm a big fan of that either. And yeah, that's all we've really got to talk about. Obviously, UFC 302 this week. I'll be recapping it in next week's episode. If I do an episode next week, we'll have to see. But yeah, UFC 302. We had a lot of announcements this week, a lot of shit going on. Let me know your thoughts on the announcements and everything that's gone on this week. Thank you for watching.